Once you've settled on a design for your maker mark, it's time to build a digital version of it in Inkscape. You can either freehand your design in Inkscape, or you can take a photograph of your maker mark as a doodle and import it as a photo. To import a photo of your maker mark, come up to File and go Import. Find your maker mark and select Open. Accept the defaults. Your photo may import into Inkscape in a very large format. So I'm just pressing Control and using the scroll wheel on my mouse to zoom out. And I'm going to shrink the size of this. I'm going to press the double-sided arrow in the corner here, and I'm going to hold down Control, and I'm going to click and drag inwards. And by holding down Control while I click and drag, I will get a proportional resizing of my image. So the length and the width will resize and maintain the overall shape of my maker mark. Now I'd like my maker mark rotated, so up here I'm going to choose the rotate counterclockwise button, and that positions the photo of my maker mark on the screen. Now I'm going to trace my maker mark using the pen tool. I'm going to click at the end of one area, and I'm going to left click at the next point, and so forth. And when I've reached the end of one major line in my maker mark, I'm going to right click, and this will terminate the line. I can choose the color that my line uses by grabbing from the palette down below, and I'm going to grab a green color, a darker green color. Now I'm going to trace out the other line in my maker mark using the pen tool again, left click to start, and then left click on every major change in direction of your maker mark and terminate it by clicking right click. And I recommend that you use separate colors for the separate lines that make up your maker mark. To change the curves of the lines in your maker mark, use the node tool and left click and hold on the lines and drag them. And you can get all sorts of curved shapes to your lines. So I'm going to curve the red line, and you can click and drag the line in multiple spots to change how tight the curve is. I'm going to do the same thing with the green curve now. And that looks pretty decent. I noticed though that I've got some asymmetry in the lines that I've drawn. The left-hand top node is much higher than the right-hand top node. I'm going to left click and hold on this right-hand top node and drag it up. So this moves the line past my maker mark, but I'm using my sensor proportion to correct the overall way my maker mark is looking on digitally right now. So I'm going to grab these handles. I'm going to make these handles so they're more or less proportional. I'm going to grab these end nodes and I'm going to put them approximately in the same place. I'm going to bring them out so that they extend as far as the top nodes do. And now I'm going to select everything here and just have a look at it. So that you can, remember if you make a mistake, just Control Z to undo whatever you did. And you can tweak those lines until you're happy with what you've got. And to hide your maker mark so that you can look at just the digital version of it, you can come up here to Layer and choose Layers and Objects. This will open a new window in your side panel. And we're going to hide the image. Just click on the hide button or the picture of the eyeball, and your MakerMark image stays as part of your current work session in Inkscape, but now it's just hidden, and all we're looking at are the paths created by the pen tool. With a clear view of the paths in your MakerMark, now you can tweak them, use the node tool, and grab the handles on the nodes and just bring them into alignment that matches your vision for your MakerMark. And you can select more than one node at once by pressing Shift and left clicking, and you can compare the handles on your nodes. And this is another way of increasing the symmetry between different parts of your MakerMark. I'm going to do the same thing over here. And I'm pretty happy with this. Now it's time to change the width and height of our MakerMark. Go up to the top panel and click on the picture of the lock icon. You want the picture to show a closed lock. This makes it so that if we change either the width or the height of our MakerMark, that the other dimension will change as well. Let's switch over to centimeters, and let's make the width of our MakerMark 3 centimeters wide. Now you'll notice that I had not grouped my MakerMark paths together, and so only one of them changed. So I'm going to go Control Z, and I'm going to box select all my lines, and I'm going to group them together. So that was Control G. Now I'm going to do that again. You'll notice that the lock icon is still applied, and I'm going to choose 3 centimeters, and now all the paths in my MakerMark have changed size. I'm going to zoom in with my scroll wheel, and now I'm going to change the thickness of my stroke lines. So over here to the Fill and Stroke panel, go to the right-hand tab called Stroke Style, and change the width of your stroke to 1 millimeter. So make sure that you have millimeters selected here. When you do that, the stroke lines should become really fat. You can change the cap on the ends of your stroke lines with this feature here. So let's experiment with that for you. I'm going to ungroup my lines. Let's grab one of them, and we can change the stroke. You want to make sure that you have round caps on it. In order to import our MakerMark into Blender, we have to convert our stroke lines into paths. To understand what that means, go over and click on the node tool, and you'll see that your path only has points at the corners where your lines change direction. We need our strokes to turn into two-dimensional paths. Right now they're just one-dimensional lines. So we're going to use the selector tool, and we're going to select each one of our lines, and then we're going to go up here to path, and we're going to say stroke to path. And when we do that, you'll see that we now don't have just a single point at the end of every line. Now we have control points that we can use to change the thickness, or how the thickness of the line looks. Okay, so I'm going to do that to my other path now. So path, stroke to path. And now we're ready to import this into Blender. But before we do that, we need to save this. Go up to File and choose Save As. Choose the location where you want to save it. Give it a name. I'm going to call this one MakerMark. You want to make sure that you have Inkscape SVG selected down here. If you don't, click on the selector and find Inkscape SVG. Then press Save. Now that we've changed the width and height and the thickness of our stroke, we are done, and it's time to import our MakerMark into Blender. To create a stencil of your MakerMark, start by opening Blender. When you're in Blender, select the default objects and press Delete. Make sure that your 3D cursor is sitting at the origin. You can do this by pressing Shift-C. What we're going to do now is import the SVG file that we created. Go up to File, choose Import, and choose Scalable Vector Graphics.svg from the Import menu. Find the maker mark that you created and press Import SVG. Now to start with, you're not going to see anything. It might take Blender a little while to import your SVG, but when it does, up in the scene outliner, you will see the file that your maker mark was contained in, and it will contain all the paths that you created in Inkscape. I created 2 separate paths, and so they're both here. The reason I can't see them right now in Blender is because they've been scaled down very small. I need to increase the size of them in order to be able to see them. The first thing that I'm going to do is click on the Move gizmo. Next, I need the item panel. There's a little tiny arrow poking out from the side of the screen. Left click on it, and you will see it. Now over in the scene outliner, click on the top path. In the item panel, after you've clicked on it, go down to Scale. We're going to scale it in the X and Y directions. We're going to scale it 1000 on X and 1000 on Y. We can't see it right now because they've been moved off of our screen. The easiest way to see them is to press the period on your keyboard under the number pad. So as you can see, only part of our path is visible right now. This can be fixed by going up to Object, go to Set Origin, and say Origin to Geometry. So as you can see, the full path is visible. It was just that Blender wasn't showing it right then. Click your other path, 1000 in X and 1000 in Y. And now we're going to also reset the origin on this one. So both of our objects have had the center reset. Now it's time to convert these 2 objects to meshes. This is done by going up to Object, selecting Convert, and choosing Mesh. So let's do that with our other path. Object, Convert, Mesh. Before we do anything else, we need to check our new meshes to make sure that they don't have any duplicate vertices. I'm coming up here to where it says Object Mode, and I'm going to go into Edit Mode for my Path 1. I'm going to make sure that I have Vertex Select Mode on, and I'm going to press A on my keyboard. And that's going to select all the vertices. Here, I'm going to choose Global instead of Local for our coordinate systems. And now, to remove any duplicate vertices, I come up to Mesh, I go to Cleanup, and I choose Merge by Distance. Here we had 203 duplicate vertices. This mesh is now usable. I'm going to do the same thing with Path 2. I have to go into Object Mode. Here I am on Path 2, and I'm going to go into Edit Mode, and I'm going to press A to select all the vertices. Now up to Mesh, choose Cleanup, and Merge by Distance. And again, we removed 203 vertices. And go back into Object Mode. Now it is time to turn our 2 objects into 3-dimensional objects. To do that, we need to still be in Edit Mode, but this time we're going to choose the Face Select tool. I'm going to press down on the middle scroll wheel and rotate so that I have a better view of this. I'm now going to press E on the keyboard, and I'm going to drag my mouse up. So I'm just going to press E and release, and then I'm going to move my mouse up. And when I do that, my path becomes a 3-dimensional shape. Okay, so I'm going to go back into Object Mode and select my other path. And then I'm going to go back into Edit Mode and I'm going to make sure that all the faces are selected. So press A to select. All of them were already selected, but that now I've made sure that they're all selected. And again, I'm going to press E to extrude that face up. I click when I'm happy with the height of the object. And now I go back into object mode. Now it's time to create the stencil part of our maker mark. I'm going to press the number 7 in the number pad, and I'm going to get a top-down view look at my two objects. I can see here that my two objects cross over one another, and there is a space in between my objects. When I create a stencil and I 3D print it, I'm going to have a problem here because this space in the middle is going to fall out, and we want to keep it in our final stencil. So we're going to play a little trick, and we're going to create some linkages from the center to the outside of our stencil. To do this, we have to do a few things first. So we're going to relocate the 3D cursor to our currently selected area. Up here in Object, go to Snap, and say Cursor to Selected. Now we're going to create a new cube from the Mesh menu. And as you can see, the cube shows up where the 3D cursor has been relocated to. Now I'm going to scale out the cube in the X direction. I will give it a length of 4, and I'm going to shrink it down in the Y direction. I'm going to give it a length of 1.5. I'm going to press 3 on the number pad so I can get an edge on view. And now I'm going to increase the height of this cube. So I'm going to set this to 5. And now I'm going to click on this blue arrow. And I'm going to drag it up so that this cube now pops out of the top of our two objects and also passes through to the bottom. Okay, and I'm going to press 7 on the number pad, and I'm going to get back into the top view. Now I'm going to pull this, I'm going to grab this green arrow, and I'm going to pull this cube that I just created so it crosses over one of my path lines. I'm going to select that path now, and I'm going to add a Boolean modifier. And from the object list, I'll select the cube, and I'll apply the operation. So as you can see, I've now created a gap in this line, and I'm going to repeat this on the other side of this path. So I'm going to select it, pull it over, look at it from the top view, make sure that I'm only crossing over that line just a single time, and then I'm going to repeat that process. So select my path, add the Boolean modifier, select the cube, and apply. Now when I create my stencil, these gaps will become links, and this inner part of my maker mark will be held in place. And I'm going to actually add 4 of these. So I'm going to add it again up here on this other path. And for right now, I think I'll just rotate this slightly. There we are. I'm happy with that. And so select the top path, add the Boolean modifier. There's my cube, applied, and move this over here to the other side. I'm going to rotate it again. And by clicking on this blue circle, we're making sure that we are rotating only around the Z-axis. We're not rotating in any other way. So if we look at it, you can see that the cube is still perpendicular on the other axes. Okay, so let's apply this one more time. And there we are. And now I can hide the cube. The final step is to actually build the stencil. I'm going to zoom out and box select all the parts of my maker mark and join them together, Control J. And I'm going to make sure that the 3D cursor is centered in my new object. So I'll come down here to Snap, and I'll say Cursor to Selected, so that recenters my 3D cursor. Now I'm going to create a new mesh. Again, you got to make sure that you're in object mode. So Shift A and create a new cube. I'm going to reduce the thickness of this cube to 1 millimeter because I don't want my stencil to be super thick and it will take less time to print off the 3D printer. I'm going to go on to the edge on view and I'm going to bring this cube up into somewhere approximately the middle of the two paths that make up my maker mark. 7 on the number pad to get a top-down view. And now I'm going to scale out my object. And I'm going to give it a dimension of 40 on the x-axis. And I'm going to give it 35 on the y-axis, which was too large. So let's dial that back to 25. There we go. And now we can manually adjust where the edges of the stencil will actually be in relation to the maker mark. I'm going to rotate and I'm going to go into edit mode. And I'm going to make sure the face selection tool is selected. And I'm going to grab the move gizmo. And I'm going to select this right-hand edge here. And then I'm going to go back into top view. And I'm going to pull the edge of what will eventually be my stencil in a little bit closer to the maker mark. And I'm going to do that for all the sides. And once you're practiced with navigating in Blender, this becomes something that you can do very quickly. And let's just do the little top one now and pull that one in. Okay, so now I have pulled in all of the excess material of my what will eventually be my stencil closer to the maker mark. Now it's time to actually create the gaps in this cube to make it into a stencil. And so I'm going to do that by going back into object mode. And I'm going to make sure that I keep my current cube selected. So let's rename it. I'm going to call it Stencil. That makes it easy to see. Now it's time to cut the slots into the cube to make it into an actual stencil. The current group of our two objects is going to cause the Boolean solver some problems. And so what we're going to do is we're going to break this object back up into its separate paths. So I'm going to select the object. I'm going to go into edit mode. And I'm going to press P on the keyboard. And I'm going to break the object up by loose parts. Now, as you can see in the scene outliner, we have far more parts than we did when we first combined these paths. So we're going to regroup them. I'm going to go back into object mode. And now I'm going to select all of the parts that are formerly part of path 2. So I'm going to hold down Shift and I'm going to select each one of those. And I'm going to regroup them into a single object with Control J. And I'm going to do the same thing for what was formerly path 1. And now I'm back to having just the two objects. So now it's time to perform that Boolean operation. So select the cube and add the Boolean modifier. And we're going to start with this first one and apply it. And I'm going to hide it now. So we can see that we've now cut that path. And I'm going to repeat this for the second object. And so there we are, and apply it, and I can hide it. And so there we have it. We've now created a stencil of our maker mark. And this can now be 3D printed. To actually transfer this over to the 3D printers, we're going to save this stencil as an STL file. We're going to make sure first that we don't have any extra vertices in this object we've created. So I'm going to tab into edit mode and I'm going to click on vertex selection. I'm going to press A to select all the vertices of the object. And then I'm going to go to cleanup and merge by distance. We had no additional vertices, so we're fine. We're ready to export this as an STL. To do that, go up to File and say Export STL. Choose where you would like it. I'm going to save it to the desktop, and I'll just name this makermark.stl. And make sure that you choose selection only, because if you don't, Your other cube, the path, objects, all the rest of that will be exported as part of the STL. We only want the stencil that we've created exported. So press export, and you will now have the Maker stencil ready to be sent to the 3D printer.